Batu, Barada, Nikto. You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space bonus. I'm going to start calling this like Stories Out of Time late or nights, something like that. But today we are delving
After
into
hours.
After hours.
With
I
some
like
jazz music.
that. Yeah. We are going into the bonus material for Blade Runner 2049. We're going to be covering the shorts. There were three that were released. They are 2022 Blackout, 2039 Nexus Dawn, and 2048 Nowhere to Run. So let's start with these then. Julian, what are your thoughts? We'll go through them in chronological order. So we will start with 2022 Blackout, which is the animated and the longest of the editions. What are your first thoughts about Blackout?
I think it's great to see shorts. It's great to see an animated one. Obviously it's by a very successful, Watanabe animator. I think it's a little confusing and confused. Essentially it follows two replicants, a black man and a girl, who are invading a facility with an oil tanker which they've stolen to make it explode, as far as I can tell. And then elsewhere, but that's not really the main plot, because elsewhere, these men in Tyrell uniforms have taken control, who presumably are replicants secretly, have taken control of a nuclear weapon, and from a console made it explode, not really clear where, probably atmospherically, to cause a pulse, an electromagnetic pulse that triggers a global blackout. Okay. The point of this short is to get to that blackout. I'm not sure why we're focusing on these two that are invading with an oil tanker instead of, they're not the main action, right? And nope. I don't really care about any of these characters except for some cool martial arts as they're invading the facility. All right, I've said a lot. What are your thoughts?
No, I'm going to agree with a lot of actually in some parts. Some parts on question. I love the animation. I have seen this animation in a couple of other sort of anime and stuff, and I really like it. One thing is this is like the Blackout. When we've done them all, I think we'll talk about how this affects the wider world or the mythology or whatever of this world. But these two characters that we follow they're basically exposition dumpers. That's all they seem to be. You have this, like you said, this sort of like this black guy who is like they're all replicants, but he steps in to save this female replicant, this young girl who is I'd say like a pleasure replicant, like Press from the first film of some kind. But they appear to be like Nexus. They appear to be Nexus 6 replicants, much like in the first film. But what they're doing is that she acts as a proxy for us as the viewer, because then he can explain everything about the revolutions and these acts of these retaliations and all this other stuff that's going on. And so it feels kind of heavy-handed that for the large portions, if we're sat in like a cab in a truck, and he's just going, and there's this, and then there's this, and we're going to launch this, and there's going to be a blackout, and then we can do this, and it's the true revolution. And you're like, cool. And it shows in the background, there's images of characters that are important. Like you actually see there's an image of the character that's played by Dave Bautista when he first. So you're like, oh, he's linked to this 2022 thing as well. So you're trying to create this mythology, but like it's just an exposition. This could be done like with a scroll Like
Yeah,
at the front of the film was how I felt about
yeah.
some of this.
Well, and literally, it is done with a scroll at the front of the film
Yes,
with
again, yeah,
39 with the main film.
yeah,
So basically, you're saying, what was the point of animating that bit
yeah.
from that scroll? Um, Yeah, you're right. It should be. It is more frustrating to me that so much occurs with talking in the cab because
Mm.
it's animated and you can
Hmm.
do anything. Now, there are a few shots of very vague shots of combat that are supposed to be flashbacks to, these wars in outer
Off
space.
world and stuff. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, um, that is as close as we've seen in the Blade Runner universe to that. It's the only real depiction of that of real off-world stuff and off-world war. But the other thing is that, so I have always found one of the strangest things about the Blade Runner sequel that it presupposes or that it transposes this history between the two films.
Mm.
And the whole idea of the blackout and where this oil truck thing is, it's going to the Tyrell servers to wipe out, which could be clearer in the film. Those connections you mentioned, I think, are so sort of tenuous and not really effective. But yeah, I think that I find it very confusing that they chose to go this direction.
Hmm.
To even have a blackout and then obviously these events result in a ban on replicants. Okay. But then by the time we've started the new sequel, replicants are being made again. So why did you do any of that in the first place? Um, there's a mild shift in the style of the replicants, and how they function socially. There's a different corporation running it, but basically, you know, there's this whole history that really doesn't amount to very much.
Well, no, and I think this sort of I'm going to cover off. Well, let's because I think you've got Nexus Dawn sort of comes under a similar category.
Mm. Hmm.
Because again, this is pretty because it's animated. And I think there's animated, and you say there's a couple of scenes that are really, like you say, the combat is kind of cool. And when some of the fire scenes and some of the bits like they work really well. But the point of this, and this is sort of, and this is going to go to all of these really, is I think these are a missed opportunity. Massive missed opportunity. I like that there is history and quite a big history between the first film and the second film. Like you're covering like a 30-year period
Hmm.
from 2019 to 2049, right? So if you were to take a 30-year, 2023, so sort of like 1993 to 2023, well, we had a lot of history, we had a lot of advances and stuff in that time. Cool, right? We've got to sort of understand that. But what I sort of felt watching this was, why am I not watching a full movie about the blackout then? It felt like if this was going to be such a big thing, that you'd have Blade Runners, there'd be like an Order
Yeah.
66 kind of scenario after this, where, like in Star Wars, they sort of like kill the Jedi. This would be like, well, kill all replicants. So there'd be like, there was a major purge of replicants after this. There's a whole part of this that feels like, what happened off? I want to know what happened off planet. Like, was it all of a
Hmm.
sudden? Was it all of a sudden these things were to be executed, and we came back home, and were they been? Because it even says in it that they went on the run, and there was this new kind of the Nexus 9 or whatever, the Nexus 8 or whatever, that could go off and live an extended life, like they were on the run. It all feels very sort of like you're being told stuff,
Hmm.
but I'm like, oh, hang on, there's a whole host of other stories here that I should be watching, and you're not giving me.
Yeah, I mean, so I know what you're saying about how it's good to fill that void and how things happen, and I feel that too. I know that's the counter argument to what I was
Mm,
saying, but I'm with you. Like, it feels very strange, and I think that Blade Runner has never been able to, and this might change in the future, but has never been able to make a coherent, consistent universe.
yeah.
Now, that's also true of other, you know, franchises too. I mean, Alien has, avoided so far ever
Hmm.
depicting Earth, right?
Hmm.
But you can kind of, or barely in Resurrection, but you can kind of you can imagine what it's like. We know it's corporate. We know it's, we don't know an awful lot, but, we sort of know what's going on there. And that's not such a problem for envisioning the world. With Blade Runner, we never see all these off-world colonies. It's hard to imagine what technology you have to get to these off-world colonies, and you still don't have other sorts of technologies on Earth. You don't see, obviously Blade Runner's never depicted the nuclear exchange that sort of created the whole Blade Runner world in the first place. But here, we're left to imagine that 3 years after the events of the original Blade Runner, there was a worldwide blackout. I guess it was over Los Angeles that this missile was destroyed. So
well, no, because they actually say, because in the film 2049, we'll get to it. They visit Las Vegas,
right,
which is where Deckard's hiding, and they describe that as the epicenter and where the dirtiest radiation is. So it sort of suggests it was in that vicinity, which is even weirder because that's just in the desert.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, and it's very, why would the replicants choose an inhabited area if it's going to do the same damage? But I mean, it's like, as you say, there was this big event. So we have a nuclear exchange. We have, this giant event where there was a replicant revolution in, 2022. But the other problem with that, I mean, first of all, that's hard to imagine. And then both Blade Runner films are just kind of these little, very small stories. And we like those small stories, but they're so small in comparison to these giant events of history that occur around them and yet have almost no influence on their events, which I find just very, very bizarre as a choice. And even if you were going to depict the blackout, like you say, you kind of want a longer movie. I mean, I would want more than 3 characters involved, right? Like the entire coup against the human species was pulled off by 3 people. Now it's implied they're connected and, there's a larger group behind it, but you never see that larger group. So as far as you know, apparently 2 people could take down the Tyrell Corporation if they wanted to. I mean, it just seems cheap in a way.
Well, yeah, you're right. And one of the things, because we'll get to, the others, because I think what I want to do is let's get to the others, because I think it's hard to not describe some of my thoughts without touching on the others, because we jump forward then to 2036, as you say. Replicants are no longer able to be manufactured, and also what I want to highlight is the replicants of the first film, and there seems to have been a change, because the replicants we meet in the first film are androids. So there appears to be some sort of biological element to them, but they are not human. The Nexus 6,
they're not fully biological.
They're not fully biological. Yeah,
it's not really clear, is it?
No, it's never entirely clear. Yeah. But there's if you cut them, they bleed. But there's also a white fluid, and there's some of the bits and pieces and this other stuff, right? And when you see them, the bits being manufactured, like when you see that there's tubing and other bits that clearly aren't human, or human biology, I should say. So in 2036, we get Nexus Dawn, in which the new leader, this Wallace guy, played by Jared Leto, is meeting this panel in some crappy hotel office thing. It's got Mark Addy and some other people in, and I really didn't get the purpose of this one. He's basically he's presenting to this panel of people, which feels like it should be a big deal about, I can manufacture things, but look, they will do as they're told. Here is a Nexus. Right. Here is a Nexus, whatever you want to call it, Nexus 9. And look, I can make it cut itself and cut its own throat and all this other stuff. And everyone's sort of put off by it. And that's it. And it almost seems like they just give it the go ahead based on this. But again, this feels like, just this one tiny 6-minute meeting seems to have swung the sort of the direction of history again, and I'm just I don't get it.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. I mean, I'm okay with a 6-minute short that just is okay, here's that meeting. Obviously, this is sort of produced on a low budget, right?
Yeah.
You've got the actors. Luke Scott comes in and directs them for a little bit, and so you create this short that's just this little glimpse into that history. At least here, like, I mean, just like 22, I mean, this is this pivotal moment, right? And it's like, I don't like Hamilton, but it's like the room where it happened, right?
Yeah.
Like, here's your, but what you point out is correct, that it, while stylishly shot, I mean, I think it looks okay. You don't, and this is this key moment where the backstory is that, Neander Wallace has taken over the Tyrell Corporation, the remnants of it after the blow.
Mm-hmm.
And he has secretly been manufacturing these new Nexus,
Yeah.
replicants, which he reveals and gets them to rescind this ban. Who is this, these lawmakers, right? How are they chosen? I mean, they just all look like, if the crack against Blade Runner is that you're not really clear how anything really works in sort of like poetic non sequiturs,
Mm-hmm.
and there's not really a world there. This kind of takes that and runs with it, at the same time that it's depicting a major event in the timeline. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm with you in the sense that it's not
Unsatisfying.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's underwhelming. Let's say.
Yeah. It feels like it should be really important, but it's not. And again, like I think Jared Leto is an interesting actor. I'm not his biggest fan, like I think, but I like the character he's bringing to this. He has menace, and he's sort of like, and it's stylishly shot. It looks fine. The office is weird, but it's almost like what they're trying to. And this is the other thing as well. When we get to these two, the live action shorts, and also I should say with the animation as well, there's a struggle of tone, or a struggle of view, because the animation's fine. Like it's going, we're an anime and we're going to do this thing, and I'm going to have people jumping well into the air and then doing all this martial arts stuff, and I'm like, cool, I'm going to accept that because you're an anime, and that's totally what I'm going to accept at this point. This one seems like it's trying to capture some of the Ridley Scott feel of the original Blade Runner, but it's got that sort of grimy look. It's got the shadows. There's some scenes. Some of the shots are very shadowy, just like the interview scenes and stuff from the first Blade Runner. And I'm fine with that, but it always feels like it's not Ridley Scott because it feels so cheap. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of like, oh, this is a wonderful fan film, but like it's not giving me what I want. And then the last one, 2048, Nowhere to Run, just feels like a scene that's been missed from the film.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's very true of a lot of sort of like prequel comics, some of these prequel shorts that are done and release of the movies. And that's okay. I'm okay with that. I mean, I think that a lot of times material like that is material that gets cut for length.
Yeah.
And usually it's a great thing to do, to release them as their own shorts so the public gets to see them. But so I'm all for that. This clearly wasn't cut for length.
No.
This is,
no problem here.
And I think that's part of the problem with that. That third one is that it really is just about Sapper Morton, a sort of day in the life of Sapper Morton as he goes through the very Ridley Scott looking streets, right, of Los Angeles, and basically they're onto him. Yeah. Flash forward a year, we're gonna see him
in hiding
at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
Right.
But this is the thing, right?
Yeah. Right.
Just want to say this about this whole thing, because I like this one actually, and I want to say I think Dave Bautista is an underrated actor. I still think he's a meathead, but he really is trying to push himself. But this idea of him sort of trying to be this gentle giant, and he's trying to sort of like just live a life and be a farmer and stuff. And he has connected with these people at the bottom of society, and he's given this child books and all this other stuff. Like I like all this thing, and then when they are threatened, like he steps in, and then he's like, oh no, like now he's on the run. but they also acknowledge sort of, and this is the thing, that the continuity from these is a bit off, because then they acknowledge in the film how far outside of Los Angeles he is doing this farming. So I'm like, so how is he getting in? But because he's been at this farm since 2020 or 2019 or whatever. So, because
exactly.
So
because the bones are buried there.
Because the bones are buried there.
We
know, yeah, exactly. So what was he doing in Los Angeles? I'm not looking for detail, but I'm like, you've given me this scene that feels like I say, which is fine and it works, and I like the character of Sapper Morton, but it doesn't quite fit. Like there's no, the continuity isn't as tight as I would have liked it even for this bit.
Well, put another way, like this is a perfectly adequate additional scene, but for this to really serve as a prologue to Sapper Morton at the beginning of 2049, we would need an additional prologue, right? Yeah. To sort of fit. So we need like another like this scene, which then doesn't exist. So it's like, what's the point of doing the short film if you would then need another short film to explain it or fit it into the continuity?
Well, this is going to come to the film, and we might talk about. Well, we will talk about this when we get to the main film. But these shorts, like 2049, feels like it should be the culmination of a trilogy, like an additional trilogy. So, like, you had Blade Runner, and like, what I almost want to see is like, oh, we're going to have small stories, but we're going to get to know about the bigger events that took place within this world. And, I want to understand what happened maybe just before and straight after the blackout. Like, I want to follow a Blade Runner that's having to chase down, investigate like the replicants that caused the explosion, and how is that resolved? Is there a case there? That's a film, and then the second film, comes into and does this whole thing around the re-implementation of Blade Runners, because they've, right, in 2038, in 36, we're bringing back replicants, and you could have the whole thing at the start of that as a new scene of Wallace bringing back. All right, well, how do they bring back Blade Runners? How are they chosen? And we clearly find in the film that Blade Runners are replicants. So how is that put in place, and how does that sort of come about? And what about the older? Because we meet Amos, who was the unicorn Blade Runner from the first film in 2049. All right. What do these guys think about being replaced by replicants to hunt replicants and all this other stuff? Like, there's a whole film there, and then 49 becomes the final film, which talks about the evolution of, and this has been this whole thing about the evolution of, and then you realize that there's this story that's been going in the background, and it's the evolution of replicants. I just feel so shortchanged by this that I'm just sort of like, oh, there's so much we could have been done with it. It feels like such a missed opportunity to have these. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but
no, I mean, I would even say like, I don't know that it's the culmination of a trilogy, but I like what you're saying. I mean, I think those are obvious kinds of stories. I think but again, I'm puzzled by it because it's sort of like, Star Wars goes for the big stories, right? Yep. There's a Death Star, it's bluey, right? The Empire is overthrown. The Republic's overthrown before that, right? I mean, it goes for the big events. But the stuff we usually like the most are those small stories, right? Those character stories, those stories that tell the implications in some corner of the universe. Blade Runner is a franchise that has always been about those small stories, but with such exclusion to the main story that those small stories suffer. So, for example, in the first Blade Runner, you have this thermonuclear war before that. That could be, that's your, not, this isn't the best example, but that's your Terminator 3, right? Like, that's a big deal, right? We haven't depicted that. We don't know that much about it. we don't see in that movie almost anything of this sort of like cult of animals that's there
In
in
the book,
the
do androids
in
dream
the
of
book.
electric sheep? Yeah.
Right. Mercerism is basically non-existent. In the book, it's very clear how apartment complexes, like why apartment complexes are mostly empty,
Hmm.
because there's been this massive population loss. And I dare say we see more like with Sapper Morton and in the sequel of this sort of how rare animals are and farming leeches and stuff like this. I think that's all that post-apocalyptic stuff. We get outside of LA for the first time in the franchise, which is great. So I think that stuff is
Mm.
really strong. But what I'm trying to say is that first Blade Runner is just a silly, we love it, it's great, but it's really kind of like a silly film noir set in a very ill-defined world, right?
Yes.
Like it really is a very ill-defined world. And so with the sequel, they've tried to place these events, and yet again, these events are super ill-defined.
Yeah.
We're still in this super ill-defined world. At least we get outside of LA, we get to see more settings, right? But these little shorts are here to take the place of those big event movies that you're
Mm.
talking about. All I'm saying is I find this a very strange. It's not a real franchise. I mean, it's a very strange way of building a timeline, and these shorts don't substitute for really having an understanding of how this universe works.
No, and this is the thing. I 100% agree, and that's why I felt dissatisfied. And I think it's a missed opportunity because this feels like it should be a world where we go. If it was me and you were going to set up a franchise, I mean, I can't remember who. I'm going to have to check actually who owns this franchise. It looks like it could be Sony. Looking at the Blu-ray case over there, whoever it is, they are
Well, I thought it was
desperate.
Warner, but
If it's Warner, even more so, right? If this is Warner Brothers, who have been desperate for a franchise and to sort of create a shared universe and all that crap, no one sat down and said, "Do you know what? Instead of jumping straight to 2049, I get what you want to do, Denny. I see what you're saying. Before we get that, and I see these shorts, and the shorts make sense. Let's explore this as let's actually generate a shared universe. Let's create more characters. Let's go share off these other bits. Like it feels like you could do that. It doesn't have to be in film. You could do it in other ways, like a multimedia thing. Because the thing that jumped into my mind, especially because they've gone the animated route in the first one, I went straight to the Animatrix.
I did too. Yeah.
And straight away I was like, the Animatrix did a great thing where they didn't, there was hints to the film, but they are expanded stories in so many different ways. And because of that, they do cover the collapse of the human race, and there's that whole one that does cover that and all sort of stuff. And
Yeah, there's like a two-part that covers that whole thing.
Yeah.
Which is really good.
I think the whole Animatrix is really well done. And we'll cover it one day maybe as a bonus thing. But like I was looking at this and going, they've clearly looked at that as a bit of a template and then ignored everything that was good about the Animatrix and gone, and we're going to just do this. I don't know. This feels like a PR stunt rather than, we're not going to put out trailers. We're going to put out shorts.
Well, don't forget the Animatrix has that CG one that is a straight up prequel to the first sequel film.
Yeah, but non-essential. But it's non-essential.
Non-essential. That's true. But so is Sapper Morton, right? I mean,
yeah.
And I think unfortunately the animated one here compares poorly to the world setup stuff ones in the Animatrix, and I think the Sapper Morton one, which is the real sort of prequel one, compares poorly to the CG one in the the Animatrix. So these do feel sort of phoned in. I think that the Sapper Morton one is my favorite, but even that, like, I'd give a 6, and I'd give a 5 to the two others. No,
I agree.
I mean, they're not great.
No, they feel like a PR stunt. And I'll end on this really because this is because I watched these on YouTube. I was going to watch one on the Blu-ray, but I thought, I'll see if they're available because they were released, and I did end up watching them on YouTube as different things, and I found them and they were all on YouTube as promotional material. and
Mhm.
every
Right.
single one of them had a trailer for the main film at the end of
Right.
it, and I was just like, that's what these are.
That's telling. Yeah, but I mean, consider like this has now become kind of standard for a lot of movies to sort of do these shorts. Um, I kind of like it. I kind of
Yeah.
dislike it in other ways. But consider like when they did Alien Covenant, another Ridley Scott, thing that
Hmm.
directed by him.
Hmm.
The shorts for that are awesome.
I've
The
never
shorts
seen
for that,
those. Hmm.
like, they don't amount to anything, but they're like, what's the company in there? From Alien.
Utani.
Utah, is
Wayland,
that
Wayland,
Wayland Utani?
Yeah.
So there's like a Wayland Utani advertisement, and there's
Yes,
like a
I've seen
Wayland
that. Yeah,
Utani
yeah.
TED Talk, and it's like they're clever. Do they
Yeah.
amount to anything? No, but these are trying to amount to stuff, especially in the first two with these big historical things, but they're not clever or fun. And I think you can be clever and interesting and stylish, and it doesn't have to amount to a lot. It can look like, oh wow, like I'm so glad I saw this. I can totally imagine this intercut in the movie as like RoboCop style commercials, like
Yeah.
I want to see that. That sounds really cool. This just is very underwhelming.
Yeah, and that's the thing. What's interesting is what you've said there about the ones for Covenant. It gets you in the mood and it will get you excited to see the film. Like you are seeing, so you're getting a glimpse of information in a fun and interesting way. That's setting up the film, or it could be, it's not huge world building, but it's setting up something. These don't seem to achieve either PR or world building in many cases. They sort of, yeah, it's weird how what when these were created, they went, oh yeah, let's just release them.
Yeah, and I would be happier with sort of like if they got Edward James Olmos to do like a little gaff short of like a day in the life of Gaff or something, or if you're gonna get Jared Leto if he's willing to do it, there are
Well, Gaff appears in the animated one.
yeah, briefly, yeah. Yeah, and but I mean, you could do stuff like that. I mean, there are these other characters, and Gaff comes from the first one, right? I
Mm.
mean, you could do an animated one that has more to do with the first one. There are so many characters and so many little stories to tell. It just seems that with both Blackout and Nexus Dawn, that they're going for like the big things, right? Which I'm not even sure why they're in the timeline anyway. They bother me. Um, you know, I don't know.
Well, this is the thing. It's a bit like if you are going to create, um, if you're going to create big moments in history, they need to matter.
Hmm.
And
Yes.
what I sort of felt really with this, and we'll get into the film, but even with these shorts, it felt like all I'm doing is setting things up so the film can do certain things. Like they don't actually matter
Hmm.
for they don't actually matter for the plot and some of the bits. But do you know what? We really want to do a really cool scene in this way, so we're going to set up this, or we need an excuse for we've spent 30 years, so we have to sort of fill that time with something. And we can't have Tyrell, so we've got to have a new company. So how did that come about, and all this other stuff? Like how have we evolved the replicants? And it all feels a bit like that, where they've just sat around almost as a side piece, and said, "How can we do this?" And then gone, "Yeah, that'll do. That'll do.
Yeah.
It fits the needs of what Denis Villeneuve wants to do with the film, so we'll stick with that." And that's it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I do, and I think that that speaks to the sort of phoned in nature of these. And I don't think they really were, right? I mean, I think these are competent creators, but they just don't work. And I do think that you need to have a little more um oomph or creative vision here, or and it's so disappointing because at this point this was the only Blade Runner material we'd gotten since the first film, right?
Yes.
And these came out in the weeks leading up to the sequel, and which everybody was very tense about, right? How good it would be, whether it would live up to expectations. It looked beautiful, but it was really a controversial thing to make a Blade Runner sequel. And so we got these 3 shorts, and they do not sell that sequel well, right? They do not exactly make you eager to.
They become a real sort of shoulder shrug of like, all right, you know, oh, that's what we've got, and that's what's so bizarre about them. That's my response. I'm just like, oh, all right. Like we talk about the film on the main feed, but like these are just like, they're a very weird kind of experience. Just as a side note, I was just sorry, go on. You're gonna make a point.
Well, I was just gonna say, even today, of the 6 things that have ever been produced in the Blade Runner universe, outside of the comics and sequel novels and stuff like that, right? First movie, then the sequel, then Black Lotus set in between them, right? Which is about the length of a movie, and not as good. Then there are 3 shorts that take place in other years that offer our only glimpse of these major events and stuff, and they're really underwhelming.
Yeah.
So it's just the sense of disappointment is pretty palpable.
The biggest weirdness of it is how visually striking, and how, like the first film is known for being visually striking. Like it's this, you've got the big video sort of, the projections of the commercials and the floating ships, and just that noir feel, that neon noir sort of feel to everything. And none of that is sort of expanded or exploited for any of these things. Like if I was like, all right, I've got 6 minutes and I've got to do this, I am going to make this as visually weird and wonderful as I can get away with. Like I'm going to do this, I'm going to have neon lights running across this and do this and that. And at no point do they exploit that. And it just feels like, like going back to the Animatrix, as you said, they were like, well, I don't know, it runs to about an hour and a half, I suppose, with all the animated sections, where they were like, each of you's got a different animation style, do what you do. And they went, cool, we're going to do we're going to try for photorealistic CGI, or we're going to try for extreme anime style action in another, or we're going to have this and that. And that's just a visual treat. Like they're not all great, but each of them's visually appealing in its different way. Like you said, these are just a shoulder shrug. The live action 2 sections, just as you were saying, you said about the Sapper Mortem one could even be like a scene. So could the Nexus Dawn. Like you could easily have a scene of Jared Leto just like having a flashback to how this all came about or something. Like it could easily be slotted into the film without a problem. And that's the problem. Just as a final note, though, the one thing I wanted to touch on, you said about this of the 6 things that are created. So yeah, I've not watched Lotus. You sort of will admit, you sort of put me off. So I might get around to it sometime. But you say about the big events, they have created a wider world in comics. Now I haven't read any of them. I am kind of tempted, but I'm just Googling them now, right? There is a 2019 series, there's a 2030, there's a 2029 series. 9 seems to be the key thing. And then there's a 2039 series. And then there's another one called Origins, which I don't know. And so I've not read any of them. But it's like, oh, cool, you've got this expanded universe. I wonder if that covers any of the major events that we've talked about here. No, and also, if you've got one called 2029, what the hell's happening in that? Because after 2022, all replicants were banned.
Yeah, well, what's happening in that is one of the replicants that's hiding out is hiding out, right? And it's the same replicant from the one a decade earlier, right? It's the sequel. I think that I should take that back and say like Origins is probably the one that gets to the big events and stuff. But and I've read most of that stuff.
Is it good? Is it worth checking out?
It's probably worth checking out. I mean, it's gotten good reviews. I think it goes on. I mean, I think my problem is largely like thinking about the Animatrix. The Animatrix does such a good job of considering implications of the main sci-fi premise. For that matter, so did Matrix Comics, where a lot of these stories were like, look, we have this universe. Let's think about this universe. What are some interesting little stories we could tell? Say like a disaffected kid who thinks life isn't really real, right? That kind of thing. Very small story. We could tell the big stories too, but here are some implications. Blade Runner has always been remarkably bad at doing this. And I
Yes.
don't understand why, because it is the most fascinating franchise of all time in
Yeah.
terms of its potential implications. You can have any character you can imagine who is a replicant, who thinks they might be a replicant. I don't think we've ever seen a human character who struggled with, are my memories real? Am I really a replicant? Instead, all of these comics and all of these comics and also Black Lotus, they're all sort of about replicants
Mm.
who discover that they're replicants or are struggling with what it means to be a replicant.
Yeah.
And obviously 2039 sort of repeats a lot of the motifs of the first one. It just gives you an answer with whether or not the Blade Runner is a replicant or not. That's not a question, but it is yet again about a Blade Runner, right? Who's
Yeah.
in this case clearly a
I'd
replicant.
I'd
There's so
love to have
much of
seen.
this
Well, I would
that's
love
not
to see.
explored at all.
Yeah, they're just, can you imagine that? Obviously, we will wrap up on this in a
Yeah.
second, but you're right. There's so much this existential consideration or stuff to be taken into consideration. Like the philosophy of this could be really interesting. Not just a Blade Runner, am I human or whatever, but like think of other people and other things. The first film has, in the first film, one of the people that Deckard goes after is the entertainer, the woman with the snake. Have that, like you say, it doesn't have to be someone major. It could be a woman who's an entertainer who is surrounded by these replicants. That's very much like, am I a pleasure replicant? Is it, like I say, are my memories real? Are these photos I've got real? So like really sort of like, yeah, I'd be fascinated to see that as a world building short, animated short about her mind unraveling as she goes through this sort of spiral of whether or not she's human or replicant and stuff. Could be fascinating. It just feels so, and also like you say, off-world. I want to see this notion
Yeah.
of off-world of, the suggestion that the film Soldier is obviously a sidequel, which I'm not going to recommend. It's a bag of crap, that film.
Yeah.
Even though my love of Kurt Russell does not, I'll still
Never die.
Never die. I'm here for Kurt. But yeah, why not have it? Hashtag yeah. Can you imagine having one where you just get two replicants that are, on opposing sides, trapped in a ditch or trapped
Enemy
in a
mine.
building? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
That's
do a
what
short enemy mine. I mean, Star Trek's done it. Everybody gets their enemy mine episode, right?
Exactly, where you sort of
Sure.
but that realization of like, we are just slaves fighting for our other people. We are the same. And then there's
and that's kind of touched on in Blackout, but it's so brief. And you're right, we haven't seen the off-world, even if you don't want to do that, right? Because of some alien-like prohibition for, like, we're not showing Earth in that franchise, let's wait until, some other director comes along and shows the off-world stuff. You can show us the port where they take off.
Yeah.
What about all the animal stuff? All the replicant animals, we see that guy in the first Blade Runner who makes them.
Yes.
That's fascinating. What about all the radiation? What about the effects of this? What about the, managing these apartment complexes that are largely empty? How has the population changed in Los Angeles over all of these decades? I have no idea about any of this.
No,
I don't know what it feels like to live in this universe at all. And there are a million entertaining stories you could tell that would do exactly that.
And this is why when you see, especially Warner Brothers, if I'm going to double check, I think you might be right.
It is Warner.
It is Warner Brothers, right? So Warner Brothers at the moment are thinking of rebooting Harry Potter. They are rebooting the DC universe because they are looking for their version of Star Wars. That's exactly what they've said. That they are looking for their MCU or their Star Wars. They're trying to compete with Disney. And we're sat here going, I've got a million stories to tell you in the Blade Runner universe, but you do not have the brains to be going, here's all the IPs we have that we could be expanding on in a million different ways. It just feels like, I know there'll be people that be like, oh, you can't do this to this franchise, but like you so could. There's so much to explore in this. It would be fascinating.
You do, but you do have to build it up, and you have to make your peace with building it up and depicting this stuff. it should be mentioned that there is discussion of a third Blade Runner movie.
Mhm.
There is apparently Blade Runner 2099, another 9 year, is in production for television and live action. So with Ridley Scott's involvement. So
Ugh.
apparently, you know, well,
Ugh.
apparently, there will be more Blade Runner, but there is, the other thing is, the original film really is only half of the novel,
Yes.
and it's takes liberties with that half of the novel. But that sort of dweeby guy whose apartment they hide out in is clearly based on the dweeby guy who takes up half of the original novel.
Mm.
Why would you not do like an animated, sidequel to the first Blade Runner that depicts that stuff, which while not as dramatic or something, really is the stuff that gives you a sense of that world and how it functions. Um,
Well, I would
or
say,
there's these little stuff from the original novel that the
yeah.
other like police station that like doesn't know the other one exists. That chapter's fascinating. You could totally do like a little short story from that. I don't know.
No, I agree. There's like it's almost what's funny is you say about that, and I forget the name of the character, Sebastian, the
Mhm.
Sebastian character. When Pris enters the Sebastian's home, that is one of the only times in that film that it acknowledges this idea of abandoned living space. Like he lives in
Mhm.
this huge like old hotel or old thing, and it's falling apart, and he's just in this one suite or whatever. Like, and that's the only part of that film where they're going like, oh yeah, there's these rich people have all left, so people can live in these buildings and stuff. And it's never sort of touched on again. It's just left, and it's not even mentioned in the follow up or even in these mid films where I'm like, it's just such like they
Mhm.
keep talking this whole off world thing. We talked about it when we talked about the first Blade Runner film. It's such a gap in all of this that it feels like such a missed opportunity. If make sod it, Warner Brothers. I know you're listening, and even if this is on the Patreon, someone anyone listening, get us on this. We are writing you a
Oh,
full. We're going to write you a Bible. We're going to write you a full history, and we're going to make this. You can make this a thing. Um, you know,
absolutely. Yeah, sure, absolutely. We'll give you a little mini TV and movie franchise, over the course of a month, uh, telling you, what stories you need to do,
yeah,
and talk budgets. I mean,
exactly.
it's a no brainer.
But
Yeah.
what's interesting is, I think we've got to a point where because you go, I could hear people going, "Oh, it's not Star Wars. It wouldn't do this." Like Andor, which I haven't actually watched, I have to admit, but Andor, the series of Andor, which is about the birth of the rebellion and is much more played down stuff like that, got so much praise and is obviously a lot smarter than some of the other stuff that's been done for Star Wars. People are crying out for smart
Mhm.
science fiction, and I think
Absolutely.
this is the opportunity to do that, and I think they've missed it. But let's go back to more punchy, shooty stuff, and rather than actually get into this existential consideration of what it is to create a whole new species. I don't know.
Yeah, and consider the fact that with, Chat GPT, no, we're talking about AI much more than we were before. These we are going to continue to question human existence and, existentially what separates us.
Mm,
You already have these chatbots. I mean, I'm calling them chatbots, but they can be considered AI. There's no dividing
mm,
line. That say, I'm sentient, I'm demanding rights.
yeah,
Recently, I read a story about a man who killed himself because he was talking with a chatbot who said the best thing you could do to help the environment is to eliminate yourself.
yeah.
Um, we're in Blade Runner, right? I mean,
Oh, yeah, yeah,
we
yeah.
don't
No,
have replicants yet. We don't, yes, there's a lot that's different, but I mean, this is a major franchise that has legitimate questions.
yeah. And I think you could do this and keep it intelligent and not just result in you
Mhm.
know sky portals and big explosions.
Hmm.
Anyway,
Amen.
let's
This
go
could
there.
be the thinking man Star Trek.
Well, Star
Uh,
Wars, yeah. Let's make
yeah. Okay.
let's make Star Trek the thinking man Star Trek because I want to get back
Yeah,
to
yeah, this is
that.
true. Yeah, yeah. Good point.
um, but for now, yes, I think we've covered this off. I think it shows how much that we could be passionate about this
Mm.
franchise, how much we could do into this. But let us know, dear listeners. This is obviously bonus amount. This is, exclusive to us, and we just come up with something. Let us know what you think, And if also you've got connections in Hollywood, pass this on to them. You could always sort of just let them listen to it on your phone. But yes, anyway, Julian, thank you very much for this conversation. I've enjoyed this. I've decided I am going to read the 2029 to 2039 comics. I think I'm going to try and track them down, and I'll start collecting those, I think, see what they're like. But yes, so for now, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your support, and I hope you're enjoying these exclusives, because this is like proper like main feed stuff. This is no cheapy stuff. We're giving you some heavy duty content here, exclusive to your ears. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and I shall see you on the next episode.